The first time the people inside the Whitmore Estate truly noticed me, it was not because they finally saw the woman behind the uniform. It was because they needed someone to carry the weight of a mistake they were desperate to explain. I still remember that evening with painful clarity. The warm glow of the ballroom chandeliers reflecting across polished floors, the quiet conversations between wealthy guests dressed in designer clothes, and the delicate sound of crystal glasses moving through the room as everyone celebrated the charity event. For nearly 3 years, I had walked through that same house carrying trays, arranging rooms, and memorizing the small details that made the Whitmore family comfortable. I knew which guests preferred silence during dinner, which paintings the family protected like treasures, and which members of the household smiled kindly in public while barely noticing the staff standing beside them. I had learned that people like me were expected to disappear into the background. A good maid was someone who worked hard enough to be trusted but remained invisible enough to be forgotten. That was why the moment Mrs. Whitmore said my name, the entire room felt different. Emily Carter. She did not raise her voice, and she did not need to. The way she looked at me carried a message everyone understood before she finished speaking. I was no longer the employee who had spent years showing loyalty to their family. I was suddenly the person standing between them and an uncomfortable question they did not want to face. The missing diamond bracelet belonging to Mrs. Whitmore's daughter had become the only thing anyone cared about. A family heirloom valued at more than $100,000 had disappeared during one of the most important events of the year, and within moments, the suspicion moved toward the easiest target in the room. I watched people I had served for years avoid my eyes while quietly accepting a version of the story that required no effort to believe. The accusation was simple. The maid had access. The maid was nearby. The maid must have done it. Nobody asked about the years I had spent arriving before sunrise, staying after everyone left, or protecting the reputation of a family that would never introduce me as anything more than an employee. Nobody asked why I would risk the only stable life I had built for myself over something that could destroy my future in a single night. They only looked at the size of my uniform, the place where I stood, and the assumptions they had already carried about someone they never truly tried to know. "Emily, you were assigned to the West Wing tonight, weren't you?" Mrs. Whitmore asked, her tone controlled and polite, which somehow made the accusation feel even heavier. I folded my hands together to stop them from trembling and answered the only way I could. "Yes, ma'am, but I did not take anything." My words disappeared into the room almost immediately. A few guests exchanged glances that told me they were no longer searching for the truth. They were searching for confirmation. They had already chosen the person who made the most convenient explanation. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell them every sacrifice, every late night, every moment when I had protected their home as if it belonged to me. But I also understood something that many people only learn after being judged unfairly. Facts do not always arrive before assumptions. Sometimes people prefer a simple answer because a complicated truth would force them to question their own choices. When someone quietly suggested searching my room, I felt something far deeper than fear. I felt the pain of realizing that the people who had ignored me for years had finally decided to see me, but only as someone they could accuse. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and the person everyone had been waiting for walked into the room. I had heard the stories about Alexander Whitmore long before that night. His name carried influence throughout New York's business world, not because he demanded attention, but because he had built an empire through patience, intelligence, and an ability to notice things other people missed. He entered wearing a perfectly fitted black suit, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to prove his authority. Most people expected him to look at the missing bracelet, the angry guests, or the evidence placed against me. Instead, his attention moved directly toward me. For the first time that evening, I felt as though someone was looking beyond the uniform and the accusation. His eyes studied my expression, my position in the room, and the details everyone else had ignored. He did not seem interested in accepting the answer that had already been decided for him. After a moment, he turned toward the people gathered around him and asked a question that nobody expected. "What exactly happened?" Mrs. Whitmore immediately stepped forward and explained everything, certain that Alexander would agree with her conclusion. Everyone in that ballroom seemed to believe the same thing. But Alexander did not accuse me. He did not defend me either. He simply looked around the room with a calm expression, as if he were putting together pieces of a puzzle that no one else had noticed. Then his eyes returned to me, and he spoke quietly. Interesting. Everyone here has already decided she is guilty, but nobody has asked the question that actually matters. He paused briefly, looking at the evidence placed before him. Why would someone make the evidence so obvious? That was the first moment I understood Alexander Whitmore was different from everyone else in that room. He was not looking at me as a suspect, an employee, or a problem that needed to be removed. He was looking at me as if there was a hidden truth waiting to be discovered, and I had no idea that one question would begin uncovering a secret I had spent years trying to keep buried. I had spent 3 years becoming invisible in that house, and somehow one night was enough for everyone to notice me for the wrong reason. After Alexander Whitmore asked why the evidence was so obvious, nobody in the ballroom knew how to respond. The silence that followed felt heavier than the accusations that came before it. Mrs. Whitmore adjusted her posture, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Mr. Whitmore, the bracelet was in her assigned area. The staff member responsible should be questioned. Alexander did not answer immediately. He simply looked toward the table where the empty jewelry box sat. Then he looked at the guest list, the schedule, and the room around us. I watched carefully because I had learned something during my years working for wealthy families. The most powerful people were usually the ones who noticed details everyone else ignored. Emily, he said. Hearing my name from him felt different. Not because of his voice, but because he said it like I was a person, not a position. How long were you in the West Wing? I swallowed and answered honestly. About 20 minutes, sir. I was delivering refreshments and checking the rooms before the guests arrived. And during that time, who was there? I started to answer, but I stopped. That was the problem. Everyone had been moving around. Guests, employees, family members. Too many people had access. Too many people had reasons to avoid attention. I do not know, I admitted. A few people exchanged doubtful looks again, but Alexander noticed. He noticed everything. That answer is more believable than a perfect explanation, he said. His words surprised me. Nobody had defended me before. Not like that. Most people wanted quick answers. They wanted a simple story with a clear villain. Alexander seemed interested in the truth, even if the truth was complicated. He walked toward the display table and studied the bracelet case without touching it. When was the last time anyone confirmed the bracelet was still here? He asked. Mrs. Whitmore hesitated. It was only a second, but it was enough. Alexander saw it. Before the guests arrived, she said. Who confirmed it? Another pause. The room changed. Suddenly, the questions were not about me anymore. They were about everyone. I stood quietly, still holding the tray I had been carrying when my entire life seemed to shift. I wanted to leave. I wanted to return to my small apartment, make a cup of tea, and pretend this night never happened. But something kept me there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange feeling that for the first time in years, someone was actually listening. After a few minutes, Alexander turned back to me. You have worked here for 3 years. Yes, sir. Have there ever been complaints about your work? I shook my head. No. Have you ever been accused of dishonesty before? Again, I shook my head. He looked at the people around him. Then we have a person with a clean record and a situation where everyone accepted the easiest answer. His eyes returned to mine. That usually means someone wanted people to stop asking questions. I felt a quiet fear settle inside me. Not because I believed I had done something wrong, because I realized someone had planned for me to become the target. Later that night, after most guests had left, I was preparing to return to my room when Alexander stopped me in the hallway. The mansion was finally quiet. The lights were dim. For the first time, he seemed less like the powerful man everyone feared and more like someone searching for a missing piece of a puzzle. Emily, he said softly, there is something about this situation that does not make sense. I looked at him, unsure what to say. Then he added, and I think you know more than you are telling me. I had spent years believing that staying quiet was the safest way to survive. But that night, I learned that silence does not always protect you. Sometimes, it only gives other people the chance to write your story for you. After Alexander Whitmore stopped me in the hallway, I stood there with my hands folded, trying to understand why a man like him would care about a situation involving someone like me. People like Alexander lived in a world where problems disappeared with a phone call. People like me lived in a world where one accusation could take everything away. You think I know more than I am saying, I replied carefully. His expression did not change. I think you were protecting someone. That answer caught me off guard. Because he was right, but not in the way he thought. I had spent years protecting the memory of a life I no longer had. I had learned that some secrets were easier to carry alone than to explain to people who had already decided who you were. I do not know who took the bracelet, I said. But I know I did not do it. Alexander watched me for a moment. Then he asked the question I had been afraid someone would ask. Why did you not defend yourself more strongly tonight? I looked down at my hands. There were small signs of the work I did every day. Tiny marks from cleaning, organizing, and taking care of a house that was never really mine. Because I have learned that people hear what they want to hear, I said quietly. And sometimes proving your innocence to someone who already judged you is impossible. For the first time, something changed in Alexander's expression. Not pity. I did not want pity. It was something closer to understanding. The next morning, the Whitmore Estate felt completely different. The whispers had not disappeared. They had only become quieter. Staff members avoided looking at me. Guests who had stayed overnight watched me carefully, as if they were waiting for another mistake. But Alexander had started his own investigation. He reviewed the timeline of the event. He checked every detail that others had ignored. The bracelet had been placed in the family room before the charity dinner. Only a few people knew where it was stored. The security system showed no unusual activity. The guest list had no missing names. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That was what bothered him. Later that afternoon, Alexander found me organizing flowers in the east hallway. You worked here before the Whitmores renovated this section, he said. I turned around, surprised. Yes, I know the house pretty well. He looked at the old wooden cabinet beside me. Then tell me something. Why was this cabinet moved 3 inches from where it used to be? I stared at it. Most people would never notice something that small. But I did. I had cleaned that cabinet every week for years. Because someone moved it recently, I said. Alexander nodded slowly. Exactly. He opened the cabinet and found nothing unusual. But his attention shifted to the floor beneath it. A small scratch marked the polished wood. It was not enough for anyone else to notice. But Alexander noticed everything. The evidence was not missing, he said. It was placed. My heart started beating faster. Someone had not simply blamed me. Someone had carefully created a story where I became the obvious answer. Why would someone do that? I whispered. Alexander looked at me with a serious expression. That is what we are going to find out. Then his eyes moved toward the old cabinet again. But there is something else I need to understand. Emily, how did you know this house had changed before I did? I froze. Because the answer was connected to a part of my life I had buried for years. A part of my past I promised myself I would never reveal. And somehow, Alexander Whitmore was getting closer to the truth. For years, I had convinced myself that my past was something I could lock away forever. I thought if I changed my name, changed my life, and stayed quiet, the person I used to be would disappear. But standing beside that old cabinet in the Whitmore Estate, I realized something I had been afraid to admit. The past does not disappear. It waits. After Alexander asked how I knew the house had changed, I looked away. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. The walls that had always protected me now felt like they were holding memories I had tried to forget. Emily, Alexander said calmly, I am not asking because I want to judge you. I looked back at him. Then why are you asking? He paused for a moment. Because someone tried to make you look guilty. And the only way to understand why is to understand who you really are. His words stayed with me. Who I really was. That was the question I had avoided for years. I was Emily Carter now, a maid, a woman who lived in a small apartment, worked long hours, and kept her life simple. But before that, I was someone else. Someone who lived behind large gates, attended formal dinners, and knew people whose names appeared in newspapers. I had grown up around wealth, but I learned early that money did not always mean kindness. The night my life changed, I lost more than a home. I lost my trust in people. I picked up the flowers I had been arranging and placed them carefully into the vase. I used to know this house because I lived here, I finally said. Alexander became completely still. What? I took a deep breath. Not as an employee. The silence between us felt endless. My father worked with the original owners of this estate. My family spent years here. Alexander studied my face, trying to connect the pieces. Then why are you working as a maid? I lowered my eyes. That question was harder to answer. Because sometimes starting over means leaving behind everything people think they know about you. He did not interrupt. That surprised me. Most people rushed to fill silence. Alexander allowed it to exist. My family lost everything years ago, I continued. After that, I learned that people who once called you a friend can forget your name when you have nothing left to offer them. Alexander's expression changed slightly. He understood something about that. Maybe more than I expected. He knew what it was like to live in a world where trust was rare. Why hide your identity? He asked. I looked toward the windows overlooking the garden. Because my family name became a burden. Everyone wanted answers I could not give. Everyone wanted something from me. I just wanted a normal life. Alexander looked at me carefully. And the bracelet? I shook my head. I do not know who took it, but I know this was not random. He waited. I continued. The person who framed me knew exactly how people here would react. They knew I was the easiest person to blame. Alexander glanced down the hallway. Someone who knew the house. I nodded. Someone who knew me. That was the part that frightened me the most. Not the accusation. Not the whispers. It was the possibility that someone from my past had found me again. Later that evening, Alexander asked me to show him old areas of the estate that had changed over the years. As we walked through the quiet halls, I noticed something I had not seen in a long time. He was not treating me like an employee. He was listening. He was asking questions. He was trying to understand. Then we reached a small room near the library. A room that had once belonged to my family. The door was locked. I had not seen it opened in years. Alexander looked at the lock, then at me. Why would someone keep this room sealed? My heart tightened. Because I knew the answer. There was something inside that room connected to the secret I had hidden for years. And somehow, I knew Alexander Whitmore was about to discover the truth I had spent my entire adult life protecting. I had spent years avoiding that door. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I was afraid of what it would remind me of. Some memories are not painful because they are forgotten. They are painful because they never truly leave. Alexander stood beside me in the quiet hallway, waiting for an answer. The locked door in front of us carried years of silence behind it. Emily, he said softly, if there is something connected to what happened, we need to know. I looked at the old wooden frame. My fingers touched the small key hanging from my necklace. I had carried it for years without ever using it. A piece of my old life that I refused to let go of and refused to return to. Alexander noticed. You have the key? I nodded slowly. I kept it because I thought one day I would have the courage to come back. The truth was, I never expected that day to arrive. I unlocked the door, and the room opened with a quiet sound that felt like a memory waking up. Dust covered the furniture, but everything was still exactly where it had been. The small desk near the window, the shelves filled with old books, the framed photographs that showed a family I barely recognized anymore. My family. I stepped inside slowly. Alexander followed, but he did not rush ahead. He gave me space. That small gesture meant more than he probably realized. Most people wanted answers immediately. Alexander understood that some truths needed time before they could be spoken. I walked toward the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside was a collection of letters, carefully tied together with a faded blue ribbon. These belong to my father, I said. Alexander looked at the letters, but did not touch them. What was he involved in? I hesitated. That was the question I had spent years trying to avoid. My father worked with many powerful people, I explained. He believed business should be built on trust. But he discovered that some people cared more about control than honesty. Alexander's expression became serious. And that cost your family everything. I nodded. After he disappeared from the public world, people started spreading rumors. They said my family failed because we were careless. They never knew the truth. I opened one of the letters carefully. The handwriting was familiar. My father's handwriting. A reminder of a time when life felt safe. He knew something was wrong before everything changed. I whispered. He tried to protect us by keeping records of what happened. Alexander looked at the pages. Records about who? I looked at him. People who had power. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The mystery surrounding the bracelet suddenly felt connected to something much larger. Someone had not chosen me because I was weak. Someone had chosen me because they knew exactly who I was. Alexander walked toward the desk and noticed a small photograph hidden beneath the papers. He picked it up carefully and looked at it. Is this you? I stepped closer. The picture showed me as a teenager standing beside my father outside the same estate. But there was another person in the photograph. A young man standing in the background. Someone I had not noticed before. Alexander's expression changed the moment he saw him. "Do you know this person?" I asked. He looked at the photograph for several seconds. "I have seen him before." My heart tightened. "Who is he?" Alexander placed the photograph back on the desk. "Someone who should not be connected to this house anymore." I looked at him, confused. "Why?" He looked toward the locked door behind us. "Because if he is involved, then this was never just about a missing bracelet." Those words stayed with me. The accusation against me had been the beginning, not the end. Someone wanted my past uncovered. Someone wanted me to remember who I used to be. And standing in that forgotten room with Alexander Whitmore, I realized the secret I had hidden for years was no longer mine alone. I thought the hardest part was being blamed for something I did not do. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing someone had been waiting years for me to remember who I really was. After Alexander saw the photograph in my father's old room, I could feel the past moving closer. I wanted to ask him how he knew the man in the picture, but something in his expression stopped me. It was not fear. It was recognition. "Who is he?" I asked again. Alexander looked at the photograph one more time before answering. "His name is Richard Hale." The name meant nothing to me at first. Then I remembered. My father used to mention him when I was younger. Not often, never in front of strangers, but enough for me to remember the seriousness in his voice. "He worked with my father," I said quietly. Alexander nodded. "He was also one of the last people seen with your father before everything changed." The room suddenly felt different. For years, I had believed my family lost everything because of bad luck. A failed business, broken promises, people walking away when things became difficult. But maybe there was more to the story. Maybe there was a reason my father wanted me to stay hidden. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Alexander looked surprised by the question. "Because someone is trying to destroy your reputation." I shook my head. That is not enough. People do not usually care about the truth when the person accused is someone like me. His eyes softened slightly. "That is exactly why I care." I did not know how to respond. Alexander Whitmore was known as a man who could influence powerful people. Yet he was standing in an old room, looking through forgotten documents with a woman everyone else had already judged. It did not make sense. And somehow, that made me trust him even less and more at the same time. We continued searching through my father's records. Most of the documents were old business papers, but hidden among them were notes written by hand. Small observations, names, dates, details that seemed ordinary until you looked closer. Alexander read each page carefully. "Your father was collecting information," he said, "about people he did not trust." I touched one of the papers gently. "He always told me that the truth survives if someone is brave enough to protect it." Alexander looked at me. "And you have been protecting it all these years." I looked away. I was hiding. He shook his head. "There is a difference." Those words stayed with me. I had always thought disappearing meant I was weak. But maybe I had been surviving in the only way I knew how. Later that evening, Alexander arranged for the bracelet investigation to continue privately. He made it clear that nobody at the estate was allowed to accuse me again without proof. For the first time since the incident began, I walked through the house without feeling like every shadow was watching me. But peace did not last long. Before leaving the old room, Alexander found one final envelope hidden behind a shelf. My name was written on the front. Emily Carter. My hands froze. My father had written it. Years ago, before I changed my life. Before I became someone everyone overlooked. Alexander handed it to me carefully. "You should open this when you are ready." I stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of everything inside it. Then Alexander said something I never expected to hear from him. "Whatever happened in your past, it does not change what I see now." I looked at him. For years, I had believed my secret was the thing that defined me. But standing there with the one person who refused to judge me, I wondered if the truth I feared revealing was actually the thing that would finally set me free. I spent years believing that the truth was something dangerous, something that could take away the little peace I had built for myself. But when I finally held the letter my father left behind, I realized something important. The truth only becomes powerful when someone is brave enough to face it. I sat alone in the old room for several minutes, staring at the envelope with my name written across it. My hands felt heavier than they should have. It was only paper, only ink, but it carried a part of my life I had tried to forget. Alexander remained near the doorway, giving me the space I needed. He did not ask questions. He did not pressure me. That was something I noticed about him. A man like Alexander Whitmore could have demanded answers from anyone. Yet with me, he waited. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter from my father. The handwriting immediately brought back memories of Sunday mornings, old conversations, and a life that felt impossibly far away. My dear Emily, the letter began. I had to stop for a moment before continuing. If you are reading this, then you are finally ready to know the truth. My breath became uneven. My father knew. He knew I would hide. He knew I would run from the past. The letter explained that before everything changed, he discovered someone inside his business circle was manipulating information and damaging relationships between trusted partners. He did not know who he could trust, so he kept records and protected the most important details. He wanted to expose the truth, but he also wanted to keep me safe from being pulled into a world I did not understand. At the bottom of the letter was one sentence that stayed with me. Never let people convince you that your kindness is weakness. I closed my eyes. My father had always believed that. Even when the world treated us unfairly, he never wanted me to become bitter. He knew who you would become, Alexander said quietly. I looked up. What do you mean? He knew you would choose compassion over revenge. I looked at him, surprised. Most people saw my kindness as something that made me easier to ignore. Alexander saw it differently. Before I could respond, his phone received a message. His expression changed as he read it. Not fear. Not anger. Focus. What is it? I asked. He looked at me. The bracelet was not the only thing that disappeared that night. My heart sank. What else? A document from the Whitmore family archives. The room became silent. A document connected to your father. Suddenly, everything became clearer. The missing bracelet was a distraction. Someone wanted everyone looking at me while something else was happening. They used me, I whispered. Alexander nodded. They expected everyone to believe the accusation because it fit the story they created. I looked down at the letter in my hands. For years, I had hidden because I thought my past made me a target. But now I understood something else. My past was not the weakness they could use against me. It was the reason they were afraid. Later that evening, Alexander asked me to walk with him through the estate. He showed me old records, family documents, and information he had collected over the years. For the first time, I saw that he was not just a powerful businessman. He was someone who understood what it meant to carry secrets. You have spent years protecting everyone else, he said. Who protected you? I did not have an answer, because nobody had ever asked me that question before. When we reached the main hallway, we found a message waiting on the table. No name, no explanation, just one sentence. Some secrets should stay buried. I looked at Alexander. He looked back at me, and in that moment, I realized the person who wanted me silent had finally made one mistake. They reminded me that my voice mattered. I used to think the hardest secrets were the ones we kept from other people. But I was wrong. The hardest secrets are the ones we keep from ourselves because admitting the truth means accepting that our entire life was built around something we misunderstood. After we found the message in the hallway, I expected Alexander to react the way everyone else did when faced with a threat. I expected anger. I expected control. Instead, he simply looked at the paper, then looked at me. Are you afraid? He asked. The question surprised me. Not because I was not afraid. I was. But because he asked about me, not about the situation. I looked at the words written on the page. Some secrets should stay buried. For years, I had believed my past was something I needed to hide. Now I understood that someone else wanted me to keep hiding because they were afraid of what would happen if I stopped. No, I answered quietly. I think I am tired. Alexander studied my expression. Tired of what? I looked around the estate where I had once lived as a child and later returned as an employee. The same walls, the same rooms, but a completely different person standing inside them. I am tired of people deciding who I am before they know me. Alexander did not respond immediately. Then he said something I never expected. Then let them learn who you are. Those words stayed with me. The next morning, Alexander invited me to review the information he had gathered. For the first time, I sat at the same table as people who once looked through me. I was no longer carrying empty plates or standing quietly in the background. I was part of the conversation. The investigation revealed something unexpected. The person who arranged the accusation had carefully studied the estate routines. They knew the staff schedules. They knew the security system. They knew exactly when the bracelet could disappear and when attention would turn toward me. But there was one detail they missed. They underestimated how much I remembered. I knew every corner of that house, every change, every habit, every person who acted differently when they thought nobody was watching. You notice things because you have spent years being ignored, Alexander said. I looked at him. That sounds like a compliment. A small smile appeared on his face. It is. It was the first time I saw something different in him. Not the powerful man everyone respected. Not the person surrounded by influence and responsibility. Just Alexander. A man who understood what it felt like to carry a burden alone. Later that day, we discovered the missing document from the archives had been connected to my father's old business records. It contained information about a financial agreement that proved my father had not failed because of poor decisions. He had been trying to expose dishonest actions within a group of people he once trusted. The truth was finally coming together. My family had not lost everything because we were weak. We lost everything because someone wanted us to disappear. I held the document in my hands and felt something I had not felt in years. Relief. Not because everything was fixed. Not yet. But because I finally understood my own story. Alexander stood beside me as we looked through the records. You know, he said, most people would have used this information to get revenge. I looked at him. And what would you do? He paused. I would make sure the truth is impossible to ignore. For the first time in years, I believed I could do the same. But as we prepared to reveal what we discovered, one final piece of information appeared. A name connected to everything. A name from my family's past. A name Alexander recognized immediately. And when he saw it, his expression changed. Emily, he said quietly, there is something you need to know about this person. I looked at him, waiting for the truth. Because I had a feeling the next secret would change everything. I spent years believing that my past was the reason I had to hide. But that day, standing beside Alexander Whitmore, I finally understood something I had never considered before. Maybe my past was not a burden. Maybe it was the reason I had survived everything that tried to break me. Alexander held the document in his hand, his expression more serious than I had ever seen. The name connected to these records is Richard Hale, he said. But there is something else you need to know. I waited. Richard Hale once worked with my family. The words felt heavier than I expected. I looked at him carefully. Your family? Alexander nodded. Years ago, before I built my company, my family had business connections with many people. Richard was one of them. I thought back to the photograph. The man standing behind my father. The person I had forgotten, but somehow remembered at the same time. Why did my father never tell me about you? I asked. Alexander looked toward the window. Because he was trying to protect you. That answer surprised me. How would he have known about you? Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he explained. Years ago, before he became the person everyone knew today, Alexander's family faced a difficult period. My father had helped him during that time. Not because of business. Not because he wanted anything in return. He helped because he believed people mattered more than power. I listened carefully, realizing that the story I thought belonged only to my family was connected to his as well. Your father was one of the few people who trusted me when others did not, Alexander said. He believed I could become someone better than the world expected me to be. I looked down at the letter in my hands. My father had spent his life protecting others. Even when everything fell apart, he never stopped believing in people. Then why did everything change? I asked. Alexander looked at the documents again. Because someone wanted control. Your father discovered information that threatened their plans. He tried to protect the truth, and he hid the evidence where they could not find it. I understood then. The accusation against me was never only about the bracelet. It was about finding the records. It was about making me disappear before I remembered what my family had left behind. But there was one thing they did not understand. I was no longer the scared young woman who ran away from her past. I was someone who had spent years learning patience, responsibility, and strength. Someone who knew the value of honesty because she had seen what happened when people abandoned it. Alexander looked at me. You have a choice, Emily. What choice? You can walk away. You can return to the life you built and leave this behind. I thought about it. The small apartment. The quiet mornings. The simple life I had created. Then I thought about my father. About the people who had been hurt because the truth stayed hidden. No, I said. Alexander looked surprised. No. I shook my head. I spent years running from this. I am not running anymore. For the first time, I saw genuine respect in his eyes. Not because of my past. Not because of what my family once had. Because of the choice I made in that moment. Together, we revealed the truth behind the missing bracelet and the hidden documents. The evidence showed that I had been framed, and the people who created the false story could no longer hide behind it. The same people who once looked at me and saw only a maid finally saw the person I had always been. But the biggest change was not what happened to them. It was what happened to me. I stopped measuring my worth by how others treated me. I stopped believing that being overlooked meant being insignificant. And Alexander changed too. The man everyone knew for his influence and power became someone who listened more, trusted more, and remembered the lesson my father had taught him years ago. That kindness was never weakness. Months later, I walked through the Whitmore Estate again. But this time, I was not carrying a tray. I was standing there as someone who belonged. Alexander joined me near the garden where my father once spent hours talking about dreams and possibilities. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we never found the truth?" he asked. I smiled softly. "I think we would have found another way." He looked at me. "You always believed that." I looked across the garden. "No, but I do now." The world had once seen me as someone easy to ignore. A woman without power. A person who did not matter. But they were wrong. Because sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the person who carries the truth that changes everything. And sometimes, the person who saves you is not the one who gives you power. It is the one who reminds you that you already had it all along.